Welcome, everyone. We are
Bienvenidos a
excited
todos. Estamos muy
this night
emocionados
to listen to the
de escuchar
speaker,
esta
Dr.
noche a
Ben
nuestro
Bikman.
presentador, al doctor Benjamin Bikman.
And before we get into the main topic, we have a few small announcements. So, first off, very quickly, why are we even here tonight? Well, this is because Unicity is running a special challenge. All of us are here because we're working on improving or maintaining our metabolic health. And right now, we want to invite anyone to participate in the Live Unlock Challenge to get even more motivation to improve your health, but also potentially win some awesome prizes for doing so. There's no fee, there's no cost at all to opt in. This is just something that we're doing to help provide more motivation because we know it can be hard, especially during the summer months that are full of vacation. And so this challenge is already open, but it closes June 15th, or really June 16th at midnight. So 11:59 p.m. on June 15th is the latest you can join. And here's how you can opt in. But the winners of this that we will be announcing at our big event on November 7th in Phoenix, Arizona, where we'll be hearing from some incredible speakers in the metabolic health world. But the big prize is that we'll be taking the grand prize winner on a full trip package to Bangkok, Thailand, where they can also attend our Global Leadership and Innovation Conference. The runners up will each receive $2,000 cash prize. And then there'll be other prizes who will get some awesome swag and different types of prizes. And it's all just for having an amazing health transformation using these Feel Great products, utilizing the Feel Great app. So let me quickly cover how people can join this challenge if you're not already opted in. And it's all done through the Feel Great Fasting app. Many of you heard about this call, this webinar tonight because of the information in this incredible app. But make sure that you have the app downloaded. You can get it in the App Store, Google Play Store, and then complete your body scan and opt in to the challenge. And from that point on, it's that easy. Now, this body scan, right, this is completely private. This is for you to see how your body changes. At the end of the day, Unicity's products, the Feel Great products are amazing because you can measure the results. And this is really our way of giving you more tools to track those measurements easily. Really see what shows up differently in your scan from now to right before October ends. That's when the challenge will be wrapping up, is end of October. And you're going to be able to see the difference in the before and the after and share that to maybe win some awesome prizes. But at the end of the day, everyone wins because your health has improved, your metabolism has improved, all the things. And that's what we want to learn about. So you can scan this or take a screenshot and on your phone, right? Go here. But if you just download the app, the Feel Great Fasting app, that'll take you through the steps you need to be able to join the challenge and get into this participation to maybe win some prizes, but more importantly, transform your health. Unlock some amazing physical benefits that come from just being back to insulin sensitivity. On that note, I know that people are tuning in not to listen to Sam Hughes, right, an employee of Unicity, but we're here to be able to learn from Dr. Ben Bikman. And so I'm going to turn the time back over to Fenton Hughes, who is the product manager over the Feel Great Fasting app. And he'll be leading this discussion with Dr. Ben Bikman to get into all the amazing information we have here.
Thank you, Sam, and welcome, Dr. Bikman. We're so honored to have you with us.
Hey, Fenton, my pleasure. I'm always happy to teach a little science.
Yeah, for those of you who don't know Dr. Bikman, he's a renowned professor at Brigham Young University. He's known for his pioneering research on insulin resistance. And he's also, I really recommend following him on social media, Instagram or X, because he puts out a lot of useful stuff. So let's jump in. We have a few topics to cover tonight. I wanted to start because a lot of the people listening today have recently done a body scan in the Feel Great Fasting app. And I wanted to ask you to help us interpret this. So we anonymized all the data, and we gathered a median. So I want to show you a median person of those. There's been 3,000 body scans. Let's look at a median and get a little bit of context from you on what this means. Is that okay? Can I go ahead and share my screen?
Yep. Yeah, let's do it. Yeah, I mean,
Okay.
this is all while you're loading that up, it's really a testament to how clever these optic scanners are nowadays, where they can measure the body shape from a bunch of 2D images, stitch them together, get a 3D image, and using certain landmarks on the body, it's able to give us these pretty these estimates of body fat percent and more that we'll get into.
Yeah, so I'm going to show you these two median people. They're not real people, of course, but what sticks out to you as you look at, these sort of summary stats?
Yeah, so the first ones that are highlighted here is the percent body fat, and that is again, that's this assessment based on the scans. So with John at 33%, for a guy, that's too high. So that suggests, every 1 in every 3 pounds is fat, which again is too much. And again, Jane, that's also too much at 43%. So again, 4 in 10 pounds, a little more than that, almost half her body is fat. That is too high. Now, someone could look at that and take it with a little bit of a grain of salt. Although having said that, let me say that within the same user, the directionality can become really useful. So even if we can admit that these scans, which are validated across hundreds of thousands of scans and then compared and based off of DEXA scans as confirmation to help get these clearer, there's going to be a little bit of variety, but the directionality is what's going to be probably most important. Now, beyond that,
Ben, you're saying the directionality is like comparing my first scan to my second scan. That's what is more indicative of what's really happening. Got it.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, because someone could criticize and say, well, this is just an assessment based on the stitching and making a 3D kind of image of my body, so it's not going to be perfect. No, but it is surprisingly close, as these have been validated, these optical scanners. They're within just a few percentage points. So someone can have a pretty high degree of confidence that these scans are they're a good rough assessment, but then more important, as you just said, is the frequency as you're measuring them over time. Then you're getting it's comparing you to your original starting point, so that becomes helpful looking back. Then beyond the percent is what I think is probably one of the strongest lines of evidence, which is funny to say because it's one of the simplest. It's the waist to height ratio. Over the years, there had been a waist to hip ratio, and the waist to hip ratio has soundly been replaced with this more accurate and more predictive indicator of health and future health and potential problems of poor health, the waist to height. Now, for both of these, we're seeing numbers. They're both just conveniently at 0.61. That's too high. That this suggests that's a risk line, because the risk line is 0.5. So you want your waist to be half of what your height is. And again, that's waist. So the scan is taking that at the largest part, right around your midline, right around your belly button. That's a good one to look at. So while someone can take the body fat percent, with a little wiggle room, this one has much less wiggle room. And in fact, it's very telling. The optical scanner is going to get that one usually very, very well.
Dr. Bikman, what does it tell us? What does it say about the metabolic function of these two individuals?
Yeah, yeah. The combination of these suggests that they have too much fat, and they have too much fat in an unhealthy place, which is that middle section. One of the reasons I've been specifically pointing out waist and then even mentioning hip, it's because, of course, females will typically store more fat in that hip region. Well, that's a very healthy place to store fat. So this isn't measuring a waist or a hip to height ratio. That would be a little harder to identify a problem because hip fat is healthy fat, but waist fat on both men and women is more problematic. So it's suggesting a fatness that is in a particularly problematic section. And that's the other part here where the body scanner is further attempting to put a percent on the visceral adipose depot. And that is a little harder for an optical scanner to do, but once again, it's going to be more the directionality of it that you focus on as a user rather than the specific number that it's providing. So again, the visceral fat percent is itself going to be kind of another version of telling us what the waist to height ratio is telling us, which again is that you have too much fat in the very middle compared to how tall you are.
Let's shift gears. I'm going to move to the next slide, which shows a different story. So this is a fairly healthy individual. You'll notice the height and the muscle mass are the same. So the lean mass hasn't changed at all. But what has happened? What has changed that you see in this profile?
Yeah. So as you note, this would be the potential future of the people earlier, where the lean mass is held constant and then the fat has changed. This is what we refer to in the biz as a recomposition, which to me is the optimal change, as in the what Sam had mentioned in the outset, which is this kind of contest. You could consider this a recompositioning contest in its best sense, because we don't want someone to just have less of themselves, lest that mean they're losing fat but also losing lean mass. What this shows is that these are people who've been able to retain their lean mass, which is absolutely possible with smart weight loss, but they're losing mass based on the loss of fat. So in this instance, John is down, about 30-ish pounds of fat compared to the bad version, and Jane is down almost the same, about 27 pounds, if I looked at those numbers right. So they're losing the fat, they're keeping the muscle, and then that waist to hip ratio has come into that acceptable, that good range, right around 0.5. They're out of that danger zone of 0.6 and above, and they're in a comfortable, ideal range now.
So I'm curious, just like the metabolic role of fat, the metabolic role of muscle in this individual. This individual has 37 pounds of body fat and 139 pounds of lean mass. Can you just break down those two roles and how that's affecting their life?
Oh, for sure. Yeah. I mean, muscle is what provides an enormous amount of metabolic wiggle room. I'm sorry for the translator. That might not really go off very well, but it lets a person have a little bit of a buffer where they can indulge in a diet that may be more problematic for someone with less muscle. And the reason for that is because muscle is by mass the biggest tissue in the body, ideally. And in these instances, in both of these people, it is. And it is the hungriest. And so it provides a tremendous disposal for glucose. So if someone's eating, in fact, I remember one time when I was working with Unicity in Singapore in 2018, Dan Hughes, who was training for, I think, an Ironman triathlon, mentioning to me that he was testing, I don't want to get off topic, I'll just say he was testing measurements of his metabolic flexibility and found that he was exquisitely metabolically flexible, very good metabolic health, and he was eating hundreds of grams of carbs a day. And that's because he had good muscle mass and he was working his muscles tremendously. So the more muscle you have and the more you're working that muscle, the more you have that buffer. Now, fat mass, it's very important to note that fat is not a villain. We need it. In fact, you may all be interested to know that there are actually genetic instances of people who cannot make body fat. They are exceptionally lean or ripped, as the kids would say these days, and yet they're profoundly metabolically deranged. They're very unhealthy because you need body fat. In fact, women need more body fat than men do, and by design. And so a healthy woman will have more fat than her healthy male counterpart. So fat is our friend, but of course it's a friend where too much of a good thing can occur, where we need body fat to stay in that range. And again, the waist to height ratio is a nice method of just kind of loosely determining, is my body fat in a good range? Is it acting more as my friend than my foe?
Got it. Well, our title today is Metabolic Flexibility, How You Lost It, How to Get It Back. So I think if we look at the first John Smith and Jane Smith, and then the second, we see that the metabolism with each of them is functioning differently. So
yeah,
I want to first just ask Dr. Bikman, how did John, let's say that waist to height ratio is correct, he's over 0.6. What happened? How did he lose his metabolic flexibility most likely?
Yeah. So of course, nobody is born metabolically inflexible. In fact, maybe, Fenton, if you'll allow me, let me just define that term, where as you and I have talked in the past, and as I teach these principles with my students, I sometimes refer to the human metabolic machine as like the metaphor being a big, like, tractor trailer, semi truck, rumbling down the highway while hauling fuel. And so, Fenton, can we picture that here?
Yeah, let me pull that up just a second.
In fact, this will help those of you with a poor imagination. Fenton is going to ease your lack of imagination and just put it right here for you, just so you guys all know what I'm talking about, lest some of these terms aren't coming across particularly well.
Yeah, let me grab it. Okay,
as
here we are.
As you're getting it up. Okay, yeah. So this is I like that this metabolic tank. So imagine that your body is this big truck, and that this engine is your metabolism in a way. Now, this is a truck that is literally hauling fuel, and it's spending energy to haul that fuel. Now, you'd look at that truck, and if I were to ask everyone, where's the fuel tank on that truck? You may look at the big tank at the back, but that's what it's hauling. What it's actually using is that teeny little silver drum underneath, like right to the back of the cab. That's exactly right. Yeah, that little drum just to the back of the cabin at the bottom. And so this truck is driving down the road, hauling all this fuel, and then it has to stop and refill those little tanks. And what an irony when it's hauling that fuel. So that little tank is like the human version of glucose, where a person who is constantly just fueling in glucose and only using glucose, they have to stop and fuel up all the time. Again, ironically, while they're hauling around an enormous amount of fuel. Imagine how much more mileage this truck could get if it were able to tap into that big pool of fuel. And that's the equivalent of body fat on the human body. Even a lean adult has hundreds of thousands of calories stored on their body as fat. We only have 1,000 or 2,000 calories stored in our body as glucose, enough to get through one day if we burned it all. Not a lot, whereas a person could go weeks just relying on their body fat. Now, I'm not suggesting someone try that, but that's what it's there for. But the difference is the hormone insulin. So back to your question, how did John get stuck in that bad state? And so, or rather, let me just finish up this metaphor. Metabolic flexibility is the ability to shift between those two fuels. So let's say if the truck needed to really pick up speed and accelerate very quickly, it could tap into that smaller fuel tank because it's capable of giving a little more of a spark, if you will. But then when it's just rumbling down the road, or everyday living, as we would say, then it could shift to rely on that other fuel. So in the human body, to bring it right back to the human, decidedly, metabolic flexibility is the ability to shift between states of glucose burning, then states of fat burning. So glucose burning after you've eaten, a meal with carbohydrates in it. You want to be able to burn those carbs. And then after that has been done, a few hours later, you ideally shift into fat burning. If you don't, and in the origins of the metabolic inflexibility idea, where you're inflexible now, you can't shift between the two fuels, it was when they observed in humans that in some people, when they should have been entering this fasted, fat-burning state, they weren't. They were still glucose burning. So they were inflexible. They were stuck in, or what I like to say, sugar burning, with blood sugar being the term there. So they were stuck in sugar burning mode, and they were not, the gears were sticky and they couldn't get out of sugar burning mode into fat burning mode. So with John, as a case study, he wasn't born like this. Metabolic inflexibility is developed when insulin has been chronically elevated. So to say that another way, insulin resistance. And even at the origins of this idea in the late 90s with metabolic inflexibility, and these are scientists who were at the University of Pittsburgh, David Kelly, Brett Goodpaster, they identified that it was because of the chronically elevated insulin, or to say that another way, insulin resistance. And so what he had been doing at the time to get him stuck in the first place was things I've taught this group, although there may be some friends who are here for the first time, but it really can boil down to two things. Constant carbohydrate consumption, where primarily every meal and snack is based on refined starches and sugars, and they're feasting too frequently. They're never given their body an opportunity for insulin to come down. That essentially every waking moment, because of this modern diet, it's spent in a state of elevated insulin. And if that's your state, then you are stuck in sugar burning.
So it's like they just prefer to use this tank because they've never had to really switch, and they get so used to it they actually have to keep trailing on new trailers. Where we're storing more than we need.
That's right. Yeah. So they end up the irony being they end up spending more energy. It's harder to just get around, and you're hauling that up the hill, if you will. But ironically, it's a fuel that you could be using. You could be burning what you're hauling rather than just letting it be some cumbersome mass that you're hauling around.
How big is the genetic component of this? Like, people say, this is harder for me than it is for other people. How legitimate is that?
Yeah. It's not as legitimate as people wish, but that's not to say it's not real. So what I mean by that, perhaps non-answer, is that genetics, there's no clear set of genes. Like, we couldn't do a buccal swab of everyone who's tuned in and identify, say, you're metabolically flexible and you're metabolically inflexible. There is no clear genetic pattern. However, there are familial patterns where if someone here has a parent who has type 2 diabetes or significant insulin resistance, they are much more likely to have metabolic inflexibility than the person here who has two parents who don't have type 2 diabetes or insulin resistance. But again, so while there's a familial pattern, there is no clear genetic signature that can determine. So we can approach this topic with some sympathy. There are people here who it will be harder for, but I would hope at the same time there should be some hope, because your genetics are not dooming you to a life of metabolic inflexibility, but it may mean you need to work a little harder. You need to be a little more careful.
So, yeah, that's my next question is it possible to restore it after it's been lost? And if so, what does it look like?
Oh, yeah, for sure. Resounding yes. My lab, one of the reasons people may have heard me on various platforms or outlets refer to 90 days is because we saw that in practice, where we took 11 women with full-blown type 2 diabetes. So pretty significant metabolic inflexibility, because type 2 diabetes is a state of chronically elevated insulin. And within 90 days, by adopting these principles of control carbs, If constant carb consumption is the problem, then controlling carbs is part of the solution. And then if feasting too frequently is part of the problem, then fasting more frequently is part of the solution. That was at its simplest, the two pillars of what we gave them by way of kind of coaching and advice. And within 90 days, there was not a single clinical marker of type 2 diabetes left in their bodies. That they had, and to say that all another way, they had gone from being very metabolically inflexible to metabolically flexible. So the inflexibility can absolutely be restored, much like someone who has a tight, inflexible muscle. They stretch it out. You metabolically are stretching or challenging yourself by giving yourself a break from that constant carbohydrate consumption, that when you are eating, you're focusing more on the other macros, the fats and the proteins, which will not be eliciting that big insulin spike. But then at the same time, you're being smart with your supplementation, that you are, when you are going to eat carbs, or then you are going to couple those carbs with some molecules like a soluble fiber in balance, or the chlorogenic acids in Unamate, both of which have been shown in humans to help mitigate insulin spikes in response to a carbohydrate load in the diet. And then, of course, nowadays with Stronghold, all of you who are adopting this challenge, and I hope you will, then remember, you want to recomposition. So in the midst of that fat loss, you want to do everything you can to defend your muscle. And Stronghold it does contain ingredients that will help defend the muscle from breaking down in the midst of the fat breakdown.
Cool. So, speaking to people on this call who maybe have already done a body scan, or who just know intuitively that maybe their waist to height ratio has gone out of whack over the years, what would you recommend as protocols or starting points for people if, maybe they're interested in doing this challenge, they see 4 months in the future, what over 90 days or 4 months or 5 months can really be something that will change their outcomes?
Yeah. I would, in fact, Fenton, I'm going to answer that firstly by telling them what not to do. And I would say the first thing to keep in mind as what not to do is to focus obsessively on calorie counting. Now let me sort of mention another analogy. It's kind of like, let's imagine everyone tuning in. If the Bikmans are hosting this beautiful buffet at our home, everyone's invited, and we have brought in, with some help from Unicity, some of the world's best chefs, which would not be me. All I can make well are pancakes and crepes for my kids for breakfast. That's about the extent of my cooking. So we have the world's best chefs. They're preparing some of the most delicious food, and I'm inviting all of you, and I'm saying, everyone, come hungry, because you're going to want to try a little bit of everything. What would you all do? Just think to yourselves, what would you do in order to come to the Bikmans as hungry as possible? I bet you would do two things. You would eat less in the days before you came, and you'd probably exercise a little harder. And it would work. You would come very hungry. Can you see the problem? That is the two-piece advice that we've been giving people for decades on how to lose weight. We've been telling them, eat less, exercise more. And sure, you will lose some weight, but as you just thought through, you've also identified a perfect recipe for hunger. And hunger always wins. So in order to have sustainable weight loss, as those who are adopting the challenge, you're focusing on recompositioning, you can't have hunger work against you. So you want to be mindful of your macros so that you're controlling carbs, you're prioritizing protein, and again, Stronghold can help with that. And don't fear fat, especially fat that comes with protein in your diet. And then, as part of controlling carbs, focus on fiber, which can blunt those glycemic and insulinemic excursions, and focus with Unamate as well to help not only with the glycemic variability, but also with fasting, where the bitter tastings that come from the Unamate can help suppress your cravings for sweets and your appetite in general. And then just the bulk filling of the soluble fibers can do that as well. So you have some very smart supplementation available to you. These are tools in your toolkit in order to help. But Yeah, I think that's the best thing. So I've kind of already evolved my answer into starting with what not to do. I'd say do not focus on calories so much. Let the calories take care of themselves. Focus on lowering your insulin and giving yourself periods of time where your insulin's able to just kind of take a break rather than being on the job, on the clock all the time at every waking moment. And because most people indulge in junk food before they go to bed, several hours into your sleeping moments, and you don't want to do that. You don't want to ruin your sleep during this recompositioning phase or ever. But that's the so don't focus obsessively on the calories. Be smart about it. And I've given enough, I think, insight into that now.
Yeah, that I love that example of dinner at your house because hunger, if if you don't master your hunger and it masters you, then you'll kind of feel like a failure. And my perspective, my background is more on the behavioral side, and of course, I work at Unicity on creating the app and programs that help people. But I feel like one of the biggest mistakes people make, if I can add to what you said, is that they take on too much at once. They say, "Oh, I want to be healthy. I feel super motivated. I'm going to change 15 things in my life," not realizing that your life can't take 15 changes at once. You can't actually do that. So I love the Feel Great system because it's so simple to get started with just a simple intermittent fasting protocol, Unamate balance, and then wait until the changes like approach you. Wait until you feel good. You, as you start feeling better, it's going to be easier to say, you know what, I want to start moving more. I'm going to start tracking my steps. Or, you know what, I should probably pay attention to how much protein I'm eating because I'm feeling so good. I bet if I could make a few more changes. I love that instead of sort of like a shame focused approach where you feel like you have to do everything, it's letting the way you feel change the way you're acting one thing at a time, gaining momentum.
Yeah, I was just going to say there's a momentum in life where one good habit can start to turn into another good habit. And I love everything you just said.
Yeah, and it's like it's crazy. We talk to a lot of customers who are kind of changing things in their lives, and I mean, this is kind of weird, but I've heard multiple people say like, I started cleaning my room. I started saying no to people, like no to things I knew I should say no to. So I think there's also a spillover effect into other parts of your life that is really amazing and wonderful from changing your health.
Yeah, well
So
said.
I want to ask you about the the reason why calorie counting doesn't work. So so you said it's the hunger.
Yeah.
I think a
Yeah.
lot of
Well,
people here have probably tried various like
mhm.
diet of the month type things. So can you just speak a little bit more to why that didn't fix the underlying problem?
Yes. Yeah, it's if someone hasn't addressed their insulin, then addressing calories is going to be a fruitless endeavor. And those are the two levers when it comes to shrinking fat cells. It's that you have to appreciate that there are two distinct uh, characteristic or two distinct contributors when it comes to what's happening to tell the fat cell to enable a fat cell to grow. One is the signal and one is the substrate. Now, what do I mean by that? If you only were providing in fact, I have fat cells like literally down the hall growing in my lab in an incubator. I have fat cells growing in a little petri dish. They can be literally swimming in a little sea of calories, lots of energy available to them. And they stay these teeny little, I mean, literally microscopic little pre-fat cells until we give them a signal. And that signal is we put insulin into that culture medium, that bath, that little soup they're swimming around in. Now the fat cell has the signal, so it knows what to do with the substrate. And by substrate, I mean calorie. I just like alliteration. So I said signal and substrate. So you have insulin that tells the fat cell to grow, but then you need something to fuel that growth, and that's the calorie. You can't, if you remove either one of those, it's impossible. So if you have lots of calories, but no insulin, that's the untreated type 1 diabetic. You cannot get fat. It's literally impossible. In fact, it's an interesting case study that I show my students. The first patient in the United States to get insulin as a therapy is Elizabeth Hughes. Yes, Hughes, but maybe no relation. I don't know, Fenton. It might be worth looking into. And what happened? Two things. She started eating less and gaining fat. because now there was a signal to tell her body to store that energy. But at the same time, if you had only insulin and no substrate, then the person dies actually, because there's no fuel left circulating in their blood because insulin's pushed it all into the fat cells. And so now the brain can't get anything. So you need the signal, you need the substrate. And if someone just addresses the substrate first, to come back to answering your question, as I took it on a weird tangent, and they've just addressed the calories, but they haven't addressed their high insulin, oh, that is a recipe for hunger. Hunger always wins. In contrast, if you let the signal subside, then the substrate will just take care of itself. I mean, literally, if someone brings their insulin down, this has been done in humans. You give humans 2 meals that are identical in calorie number, but differ in their amount of carbs and fat. If they've eaten that isocaloric meal, but it's low carb, so low insulin spike, they have a metabolic rate that's 200 to 300 calories higher a day than it would be otherwise. And so that's like an hour on the stair stepper, which is like an hour of hell, if you ask me. And they didn't have to do that though. But that's the equivalent of what they just sort of earned through this metabolic advantage of keeping your insulin low. So focus on controlling carbs, keep your insulin under control, and then you actually have more of that buffer that I kind of mentioned at the outset, where you're just burning more than you were before.
Wow. Yeah. So motivating. So going back to John and Jane, the 2 data sets we looked at, the median data, what would you tell? What does the now John want to tell the future John? Sorry, I got that backwards. What does the future John want to tell the now John in terms of what's going to be different after you make that change? Like in terms of how you feel, in terms of risk factors, in terms of really anything.
Yeah, so focusing on how they feel, not what they're necessarily going to see then, just to answer the question directly how you asked it, they're going to feel, probably they will have fewer energy slumps, like that kind of afternoon slump, for example. Those slumps that often happen during the day, assuming no changes in sleep, are usually a result of an energy drop where they've had a high carb, starch or sugar kind of drink or meal. They've spiked their insulin. And one thing I've taught in Unicity before is that the higher you spike your glucose, the more you run the risk of dropping it too low after. That's something called a rebound hypoglycemia, and that stimulates hunger. Even if it's 90 minutes, they might have just eaten 3,000 calories of starches and sugars, and then they're hungry 90 minutes later. That should never happen. That's a strong sign that you spiked your insulin too high. So one thing they would feel is that they're going to probably have better energy control, better mental clarity, because that glycemic variability, in fact, I have an upcoming book this fall called The Carb Crisis. I'm focusing more, one of the whole chapters of this new book is the dangers or the consequences of just glycemic variability. When you have this kind of feeding frenzy and then this forced fasting in the body, that creates a lot of havoc, particularly on the brain, and that manifests as mood changes and cognitive deficits, even in people who are young and healthy. So clearer cognition, more stability across the board, and a handful of other benefits that I don't have time to get into.
Oh, I want to ask one more question about the body scan stuff, which is, what's the first thing that starts to move? If someone's doing this today, they say they do their body scan tomorrow, and they want to do another one in a month or 2 months,
Yeah.
What would you want to see that's like really indicative of progress?
Yeah. So that would be sort of ask that question in the frame that you had referenced a moment ago. What would future John tell past John? Hey, this is what changed first. It's going to be the waist. That as much as we vilify visceral central body fat, it's actually the one that burns the fastest. So there are human studies to show that if you measure the degree of fat breakdown, what we call lipolysis, at that visceral fat versus the subcutaneous fat, the fat beneath our skin that we can pinch and jiggle, the visceral fat will burn faster. It's selectively burned. And it's almost as if the body sort of knows, hey, I don't want a lot of fat right there. I'm not supposed to be storing you, so I'm going to get rid of you first. And so they'll notice that the waist will probably be coming in first. So the first measurement, in addition to just the normal body fat percent changes, which you aren't going to necessarily see, you're going to see the waist fat coming in first. So that waist to height ratio is going to start getting favorable very, very quickly.
I love the emphasis on the waist because I think so often when people are fixated on the number on the scale and they're trying to lose weight, but they're also resistance training, like they may gain some weight, and that's not a big deal. In fact, there's nothing.
In fact,
actually
oh
really
no,
great.
no. In fact, if that would be, gosh, I mean, that's the ideal outcome. If someone notices body mass going up while their waist to height ratio is going down, oh, then you've unlocked the best way to recomposition, where that means you're gaining muscle mass and bone mass while losing fat mass. So not forget about just defending your lean mass. Now you're gaining. That's a winning combination.
Yeah. Well, Dr. Bikman, this has been such a good conversation. As we wrap up, I just want to ask you one more question, which is, for people that are doing this challenge, for people that just they see themselves in the first John and they want to see themselves in the second John or Jane. Sorry about the stereotype names, everyone. What advice would you offer based on what you've seen in your lab and the people that you've shared your research with? What would be your kind of concluding advice for someone that's embarking on this recomposition challenge?
Yeah, I would just encourage them to have a motivation that goes beyond looking good. That if it were all a matter of looking good, I would never do anything, because when you're a freckled, wrinkled, bald guy, how you look isn't your motivating factor. So have a motivation that goes beyond how you look. Now that's the fun part of it all. That's the fun thing that you want to share. What you don't share is how your relationship with your family has changed, because you just feel better. You're calmer. You don't feel that shame. Fenton, you mentioned shame earlier. Oh, what a dangerous. It's okay to feel guilty sometimes when you've done something wrong. I think that's a divine feeling, but shame is harmful, and that will affect your relationship. You'll be more impatient. You'll be angrier. So have a motivation that goes beyond looking good. Let it be, for me, for example, I want to be a healthy grandpa. Like, that really is my motivation. And I pray that I can experience that as my kids get older, that they can marry and have families of their own. That's ultimately my motivation. Then for me, a secondary motivation is I want to be able to think well. While my looks aren't my moneymaker, my brain is. And I need to be able to think quickly and articulate those thoughts. And that's sort of my next level of motivation. And I just, when I'm metabolically flexible, I feel like I'm in control and I am absolutely sharper mentally. So have a motivation that goes beyond maybe just the ego part of it, which isn't bad. That's a good motivator, but you need to have something that I think is a little more substantial.
Make it deeper, make it bigger.
Make it deeper.
Thank you so much, Dr. Bikman. I want to just offer my last advice to everyone on the call that if you want to deepen your motivation, I think you should jump in to the app where there are additional podcasts where Dr. Bikman has talked about these principles. Sometimes as he talks about the risks, it scares me to death because, when you're talking about insulin and how it can lead to type 2 diabetes and, other things, it opens your eyes and you're like, oh, okay, this matters. But you also find content from other people and from Dr. Bikman explaining other parts of why this is worth so much. So thank you so much, everyone, for joining. We're going to end now, and just one final reminder to everyone that you are welcome to join the challenge until Monday night when the challenge window closes. Thank you all so much. Have a great night.